My parents favored my sister my entire life. Then she found out I had $15 million and completely lost it at Thanksgiving dinner. Dad was left speechless. But that explosion was the end of the story. The fuse was lit only 24 hours earlier, on a night that was supposed to be a celebration. I stood under the oversized crystal chandeliers of the 30th floor ballroom, gripping the leather handle of a portfolio case worth more than the car I drove. My palms were sweating, slick against the handle, but my face was a mask of practiced calm. It was the 30-year anniversary gala for Richard Realty, my father's company. The air smelled of sterile lilies, expensive champagne, and desperate networking. It was the smell of money that was trying too hard to prove it existed. In the portfolio was my heart on paper. It was a charcoal sketch I had spent 3 weeks perfecting, blending the shadows with the tips of my fingers until they bled black dust. I had framed it in museum-quality glass. I told myself this time would be different. I told myself that for his anniversary, my father would look past the medium and see the mastery. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I said. I extended the gift. The heavy black case looked out of place against the sea of sequined gowns and tuxedos. My father, Richard, turned away from a conversation with 2 board members. He looked down at the case, then up at me, his eyes glazing over with that familiar mix of boredom and mild irritation. He took it, but he did not open it. He held it like someone might hold a dirty diaper they were looking to discard. "Open it," I whispered. "Please." He popped the latch. The lid lifted. The charcoal study was stark dark and emotive. It was raw. It was everything this room was not. For a second, there was silence. I waited for a smile. I waited for him to see me. Instead, a laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. It was Madison. My sister stood 3 feet away, swirling a glass of Prosecco, her other hand resting on the shoulder of the vice president of marketing. "Cute, Mila," she said, loud enough for the board members to hear. "Is that from an adult coloring book? Maybe we can hang it in the staff bathroom. It would match the gray tiles perfectly." The board members chuckled. It was a polite, reflex sound, the kind of laugh wealthy people make when they want to fit in. But then, the sound I dreaded most followed. My father chuckled too. He closed the case with a sharp snap. "We will find a spot for it, Mila," he said, handing the case back to me. "Now, run along. The adults are talking strategy." I stood there, the weight of the portfolio suddenly doubling in my hand. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw the champagne glass at Madison's perfect white smile. Something inside me, the small, hopeful part that still wanted to be their daughter, simply quietly died. I took my $45,000 sketch back and turned my heel. I walked away. I walked past the ice sculpture of the company logo. I walked past my mother, who was too busy complimenting a senator's wife to notice her daughter leaving. I walked straight to the elevator bank and pressed the down button. The doors slid open. I stepped inside. As I turned around, I saw them one last time. They were laughing again, heads thrown back. A perfect portrait of a family that did not need me. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of their laughter like a guillotine. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It was pressurized, like the air inside a submarine diving past its crushed depth. I watched the numbers count down on the digital display. 29. 28. 27. Beside me, Austin loosened his silk tie. He had not said a word during the exchange upstairs. He did not have to. He stood with his back against the mirrored wall, watching me with eyes that saw everything. He knew exactly what that portfolio contained. He knew that the charcoal sketch was not just a doodle. It was study number 4 for my upcoming Ecliptic series, scheduled to headline the contemporary auction at Christie's next month. The opening bid was set at $45,000. "Are you okay?" He asked quietly as the elevator passed the 15th floor. I looked at my reflection in the brushed steel doors. I looked different than I had 5 minutes ago. The needy look was gone. The softness around my eyes had hardened into something like flint. "I am not sad, Austin," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded flat. Metallic. "Then what are you?" he asked. The elevator chimed as it hit the lobby. The doors opened, revealing the cold, empty expanse of the marble entrance. The night air rushed in as the automatic doors at the curb slid apart, carrying the sounds of Chicago traffic. I stepped out into the night, gripping the handle of my portfolio until my knuckles turned white. "I am calculating," I said. We did not go back to our apartment. We drove straight to my studio in the warehouse district. The moment I unlocked the heavy steel door, the atmosphere changed. The penthouse had smelled of lies. Here, the air was thick with the scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and stale coffee. It smelled like work. It smelled like truth. I walked over to my desk, bypassing the large canvases covered in drop cloths. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "You are going to do it, aren't you?" Austin asked, leaning against the door frame. I navigated to a folder labeled Family. Inside, there was a single PDF document. It was a licensing agreement, a draft I had spent 3 weeks perfecting with my intellectual property lawyer. My father's company, Richard Realty, was struggling to rebrand. They wanted to pivot to a younger, more modern demographic. For 4 months, Madison had been talking about trying to acquire the rights to use imagery from the elusive artist Vesper for their new marketing campaign. They had no idea Vesper was the sister they mocked for being unemployed. This contract was going to be my surprise. A gift. An exclusive, perpetual license to use my artwork for their branding, free of charge. A gift that would have saved them roughly $200,000 in licensing fees. I looked at the file name. Richard Realty Agreement Final.pdf. I thought about the years I spent painting in the basement. Terrified to make a sound, because Madison was on an important business call upstairs. I thought about the way my mother would sigh and tell guests I was finding myself, as if I were lost. They did not just reject a drawing tonight. They rejected their own salvation. They wanted a businessman in the family. "Fine," I whispered. "I will show them how a businesswoman handles a bad investment." I clicked on the file. I dragged it to the trash bin. Then, with a calm, rhythmic tap of my finger, I emptied the trash. "Delete it," I said, permanently. Austin asked one word. "Irretrievable." "Irretrievable," I confirmed. I picked up my phone. I did not send an angry text. I did not demand an apology. I simply went to my contacts. Richard, Cynthia, Madison. One by one, I selected block caller. It was not an act of pettiness. It was a professional necessity. I had an auction to prepare for, and I could not afford the distraction of people who could not afford me. I stared at the list of blocked names on my phone screen. It felt like amputation. But it also felt like relief. People always ask why I stayed so long. Why I kept showing up to the dinners, the galas, the birthdays where I was treated like a prop. The answer is woven into the very fabric of how I was raised. In my household, money was not just currency. It was love. It was attention. It was worth. And by that metric, I was bankrupt before I even started. But tonight, the ledger had changed. I looked around my studio. The Ecliptic series leaned against the walls, dark and luminous, humming with power. These canvases were worth more than their penthouse. More than their approval. I was not the investment that failed. I was the asset they were too blind to value. And now, I was going to liquidate them. The screen of my laptop was dark, but the ghost of the deleted file seemed to linger in the pixels. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet of the warehouse. For the first time in 27 years, I was not waiting for a response. I was not waiting for approval. I was simply done. Austin walked over to the small kitchenette in the corner of the studio. The sound of water running into the kettle filled the room. A domestic noise that felt strangely grounding against the industrial backdrop of exposed brick and steel beams. He brought me a mug of black coffee. Steam curling into the cool air. "You held on to that contract for 6 months," he said, placing the mug near my hand. "You were ready to save them even when you knew they were drowning you." "It was not just a contract," I said, wrapping my cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "It was an insurance policy. Not for me. For them." I looked around the studio. It was a cavernous space. 3,000 square feet of raw potential that I had bought with cash 2 years ago. My parents thought I lived in a cramped studio apartment in Rogers Park with 3 roommates. They thought Austin was a paralegal, not a senior risk analyst for a venture capital firm. They thought my life was small, so they never bothered to look at the edges. If they had looked, they would have seen the truth. I remembered when Madison went to college. She was barely scraping a C average in business administration, partying 4 nights a week. My parents bought her a brand new laptop, hired private tutors at $100 an hour, and paid for a networking semester in London. They called it investing in the future. I was studying fine arts on a partial scholarship I earned myself. When I needed supplies, I did not ask them. I knew the answer. "Art is a cute hobby, Mila," my father had said. "But we are not throwing good money after bad." So, I scavenged. I bought used brushes from estate sales, cleaning the dried acrylic off with harsh solvents until my hands were raw and bleeding. I painted on discarded plywood I found in alleyways behind construction sites. They did not see resilience. They saw desperation. And the sickest part was that they liked it. It took me years to understand the mechanism of their cruelty. For a long time, I thought they just hated me. But hate is active. Hate requires energy. This was something more insidious. It was the trap of normalized cruelty. My parents and Madison did not hate me. They needed me. They needed a failure to make their mediocre successes look brilliant. Every time they sighed and handed me a check for $50 for groceries, every time they rolled their eyes at my paint, stained jeans, they got a hit of dopamine. They felt benevolent. They felt superior. My struggle was the foundation their ego was built on. If I was the starving artist, then they were the magnanimous patrons. If I succeeded, if I was actually a genius, then their narrative collapsed. Then Madison was just a spoiled brat with a title she did not earn. And my father was just a checkbook with a pulse. They loved the version of me that was small. So, I gave them small. And in the shadows, I became Vesper. Vesper was not just a pseudonym. She was a fortress. I created her 5 years ago, after my first solo gallery opening. It was a tiny show in a basement in Wicker Park. I had invited them 3 months in advance. I reminded them weekly. That night, I stood by the door for 4 hours, checking my watch, checking the street. They never showed. The next day, I saw the photos on Facebook. They had gone out for a steak dinner to celebrate Madison being named Employee of the Month at their company, a title my father had invented for her. That night, Mila, the daughter, went into hibernation. Vesper was born. I started signing my work with that name. A single sharp word that meant evening prayer, because I knew they would never look for it. They would never look for success where they expected failure. I kept Vesper secret not to hide my shame, but to protect my joy. I built a career, a reputation, and a fortune in the silence, letting them believe I was still the girl who needed their pity. But tonight, the pity ran out. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, just the way I liked it. "Do you think they have noticed you are gone?" Austin asked. "They noticed the portfolio is gone," I said. "They are probably more upset about losing a tax write-off than losing a daughter." Austin chuckled, but it was a dry, humorless sound. He walked over to the large worktable, where the rest of the Ecliptic series lay. He ran a hand over the textured surface of a canvas painted in deep indigos and violent golds. "They have no idea what they are up against," he said. "You are not just an artist, Mila. You are a corporation." "I am a liability," I corrected him. "At least, that is what they are about to find out." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Chicago skyline was a jagged row of teeth against the black sky. Somewhere in that city, in a penthouse I had visited 100 times, my family was likely drinking expensive brandy and complaining about my dramatic exit. They were probably telling themselves that I would be back in a week, begging for rent money. They were rewriting the night to fit their script. But the script had burned. Phone, which was sitting face down on the desk, remained silent. The block feature was doing its work, damming the river of toxic texts and voicemails I knew were flooding the server. It felt strange, this manufactured piece. It felt like the eye of a storm. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. It was a subtle change, like the drop in barometric pressure before a tornado touches down. I turned around. Austin was standing by the door, his own phone glowing in his hand. The blue light illuminated his face, casting long shadows under his cheekbones. He was not looking at me. He was staring at his screen, his brow furrowed in a way that made my stomach tighten. "What is it?" I asked. Austin did not answer immediately. He tapped the screen once, then twice. His jaw set in a hard line. A slow, terrifying smile began to creep across his face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found the loose thread that would unravel the entire sweater. "You need to see this," he said. I walked over to him. The concrete floor was cold through my socks. I took the phone from his hand. It was Instagram. The screen displayed a story posted 12 minutes ago. The username was Madison Realty Official. My stomach dropped, not with fear, but with a sudden, electric jolt of adrenaline. It was a video. The camera panned over a table littered with half-eaten hors d'oeuvres and empty glasses. And there, propped up against a dirty napkin holder, was my sketch. Study number 4. The charcoal was smudged where someone had grabbed it with greasy fingers. Madison had added a caption in bright pink neon text. "When your unemployed sister tries to pay rent with doodles." Below that, she had added 3 hashtags. Starving artist. Fail. Charity case. I stared at the image. I expected to feel the old sting of humiliation, the burning shame that used to send me crying to my room. I waited for it, but it did not come. Instead, I felt a cool, detached clarity. It was the feeling of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "She has no idea," I whispered. "No," Austin said. His voice was low, vibrating with a suppressed energy. "She does not. But she is about to." He took the phone back from me. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of a pianist. "What are you doing?" I asked. Austin looked up at me. His eyes were dark, reflecting the chaos that was about to unfold. "I am lighting a match," he said, "and I am throwing it into the gas station." I watched Austin's thumb hover over the screen. The studio felt hermetically sealed, cut off from the noise of the city and the drama of the gala. But I knew that what he was about to do would shatter that isolation forever. "You do not have to do this," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I knew that Vesper could not live in the dark forever. I just had not expected her to be dragged into the light by a spiteful Instagram story. Austin looked at me, his eyes reflecting the cool blue glow of the interface. "They need better lighting," he said. He did not use his personal account, the one with 300 followers that he used to follow Architectural Digest pages. He switched profiles. He logged into his professional account, the verified profile with the blue checkmark that he used for appraising high-end assets for venture capital firms and insurance conglomerates. In the world of high-finance art valuation, Austin was not just a boyfriend. He was a standard. His verification meant that what he said was not an opinion. It was a market fact. He tapped the comment icon on Madison's post. The video was already racking up views. I could see the comments rolling in from her friends. A chorus of sycophants laughing at the expense of the failure sister. "Lol classic Milla," one said. "Does she think she is Picasso?" asked another. "So embarrassing." Austin typed steadily, his rhythm precise. He did not use emojis. He did not use slang. He wrote with the dry, terrifying authority of a bank audit. Provenance confirmed. He typed, reading the words aloud as they appeared on the screen. Original charcoal study by contemporary artist Vesper. Confirmed authentic. Current estimated auction value $45,000. Please handle with care. He hit post. I felt a physical jolt. As if he had just dropped a stone into a still lake. The comment appeared at the bottom of the feed, stark and undeniable against the sea of petty insults. I looked at Austin. "You just lit a match in a gas station," I whispered. He set the phone down on the worktable, screen up. "Now," he said, "we wait." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 minutes. It was the longest 3 minutes of my life. I paced the length of the studio, the heels of my boots clicking against the concrete. I tried to imagine the scene on the other side of the city. I pictured Madison at the after party, holding her phone. Surrounded by the board members she was trying so hard to impress. I pictured the notification sliding down from the top of her screen. Austin sat on the edge of the desk, his arms crossed, watching the phone like a bomb disposal technician watching a timer. 1 minute passed. "Do you think she even knows who Vesper is?" I asked. "She works in branding," Austin said. "She knows Vesper is the artist she has been trying to license for 4 months. She knows Vesper is the name on the mood board in her office. She just does not know Vesper is you." 2 minutes passed. My phone was still silent, protected by the block list. But the digital world was waking up. On Austin's screen, notifications began to trickle in. Not from Madison, but from the algorithm. The post was gaining traction. People were seeing the verified comment. The tone of the replies began to shift instantly. The mockery vanished, replaced by confusion and sudden, greedy interest. "Wait, is this real? 45 grand? For that sketch. Who is Vesper?" 3 minutes. The shift happened. I saw it on the screen before I heard it. Madison's handle appeared in the notifications again. But this time, it was not a reply. She had deleted the comment. Then, she deleted the video. "It is gone," Austin said, his voice flat. "She scrubbed it." "She panicked," I said, stopping my pacing. "She realized she was holding a fortune next to a plate of half-eaten shrimp." "She did more than panic," Austin said. He picked up the phone and tapped a few keys. "She just looked at my profile. She saw my credentials. She saw that I am not just your boyfriend, but an accredited appraiser. Now she is connecting the dots. She is typing Vesper artist into Google. She is looking at the gallery representation. She is seeing the bio." I closed my eyes. I knew what the bio said. It was vague, intentionally mysterious, but it listed my studio location in the Chicago warehouse district. It listed my agent. And, crucially, it listed the copyright holder for my works. Milla Warren. The secret I had guarded for 5 years, the fortress I had built to keep my joy safe from their greed, was gone. The walls had not just been breached, they had been vaporized. I felt a strange sense of loss, mourning the girl who could paint in the shadows. But beneath the loss, there was something harder. Something brighter. It was the feeling of a weapon being unsheathed. "They know," I said. Austin nodded. "They know." The silence of the warehouse was suddenly shattered. It was not my phone. It was Austin's. It vibrated violently against the wooden tabletop. The sound echoing in the high ceilings. The screen lit up with a caller ID that made my blood run cold. Madison. She had realized I had blocked her. She had realized she could not get through to the sister she wanted to scream at. So, she had called the only other number she had. Austin looked at the phone, then at me. He did not reach for it. He let it ring. 1 ring. 2 rings, 3 rings. The sound was insistent, demanding, a digital extension of Madison's personality. It was the sound of someone who had never been told no. Answer it, I said. Austin raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I walked over to the desk. I looked at the vibrating phone. I thought about the way she had laughed in the elevator. I thought about the hashtag. Fail. Put it on speaker, I said. Austin slid his finger across the glass and tapped the speaker icon. The connection opened. The sound of jagged, heavy breathing filled the quiet studio. There was no hello. There was no apology. You liar, Madison hissed. Her voice was distorted, trembling with a frequency I recognized instantly. It was not shock. It was not shame. It was the high-pitched, vibrating frequency of pure, unadulterated entitlement. You manipulated little liar, she screamed. Hello, Madison, I said calmly. I see the catalog, she shouted. I am looking at the Christie's website right now. Vesper. That is you. You are Vesper. Yes, I said. And this doodle. This sketch I almost threw in the recycling bin. Austin says it is worth $45,000. Conservatively, Austin said, leaning toward the phone. Yes, I added. I expected silence. I expected a gasp. I expected a moment of realization that she had just mocked a fortune. But I had underestimated the depths of my sister's delusion. She did not gasp in horror at her own cruelty. She pivoted instantly to ownership. You have been holding out on us, she screamed. All this time, you have been crying poor. Letting Mom and Dad pay for dinner when they visited, while you were sitting on millions. Do you know how sick that is? I never asked for money, Madison, I said, my voice steady. I refused it. You hid assets, she yelled, using business terminology she barely understood. You are part of this family. That means your success is our success. We supported you while you played artist in the basement. We tolerated your little hobby. That makes us investors. I looked at the phone, visualizing her face, the vein popping in her forehead, the shark-like glint in her eyes. So, you want the sketch back? I asked. The sketch. She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that grated against my ears. No, Mila, I do not want the sketch. I want my cut. I want my cut, Madison repeated. The words hung in the silence of the studio, suspended like toxic particles in the air. I looked at Austin. His face was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. But his eyes were narrowed. He had heard pitches from desperate founders before. He had heard the frantic bargaining of CEOs, whose companies were hemorrhaging cash. But he had never heard a sister try to monetize her sibling's existence. Excuse me, I asked, leaning closer to the phone. Do not play dumb, Mila, Madison snapped. Her voice was gaining strength, moving from hysterical anger to a calculated, predatory rhythm. I went to business school. I know how this works. You are a startup. Mom, Dad, and I. We are your angel investors. I almost laughed. It would have been a bitter, jagged sound, but I swallowed it. Angel investors, I repeated slowly. Yes, she said. Who do you think paid for the electricity in that basement you painted in? Who paid for the foo? Ate when you were too broke to buy groceries? We did. We subsidized your lifestyle for years. We took on the risk. Now that the asset has matured, we are entitled to the return on investment. The logic was so twisted, so fundamentally broken, that it was almost impressive. She had taken the language of venture capital and wrapped it around a history of neglect. She had turned their indifference into a strategy. You called my art a cute hobby? I said. You told me I was wasting my life. That is called due diligence, she countered, her voice smooth now, slick with confidence. We were stress testing the product. If you had quit, you would not have been worth investing in. But you did not quit. And now, Vesper is a valuable brand. A brand that was incubated in the Richard Realty facility. I looked around my studio. I looked at the concrete floors I had scrubbed myself. I looked at the heating ducts I had paid to repair last winter when the temperature dropped to 10 degrees below zero. I paid rent, Madison, I said. I paid you $500 a month to live in a basement with mold in the drywall. Below market rate? She shouted, her composure cracking again. That is a subsidy. That is equity. She took a breath, the ragged sound amplifying through the speaker. Here is the deal, Mila. You are going to sign over the rights to that artwork for the company branding. The contract you were going to give Dad tonight. You are going to email it to me within the hour. And then, we are going to sit down and calculate back pay. 10% of all Vesper sales for the last 5 years. Consider it a management fee for the family support network. She did not see a sister. She did not even see a human being. She saw a lottery ticket she had forgotten to cash, and she was scrambling to find the ticket stub before the office closed. You are not negotiating, Madison, I said quietly. You are hallucinating. You do not get to become a millionaire on our watch and leave us behind, she screamed. We made you. I reached out and pressed the red button on Austin's phone. The connection severed. The screaming stopped instantly. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, ringing in my ears like the aftermath of a gunshot. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the black screen of the phone. I felt dirty. I felt as though I needed to shower, to scrub the transactional grime of her words off my skin. Austin picked up his phone. He did not say anything for a long time. He simply slid it into his pocket and looked at me. She thinks this is a family squabble, I said. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. She thinks this is about hurt feelings and Thanksgiving dinners. What is it? Austin asked. It is a hostile takeover attempt, I said. I turned away from him and walked to my desk. I sat down and woke up my laptop. The screen glowed to life, a blue square in the darkness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not text back. I did not engage. I knew that any response I sent now would just be fuel for her fire. She wanted a fight. She wanted to drag me into the mud, to make me scream and cry and defend myself until I was exhausted. That was how it had always worked. They created chaos, and I paid the emotional tax to fix it. But I was not their daughter anymore. I was a business entity, and they had just threatened my assets. I opened a new browser tab. I typed 3 words into the search bar. Sterling and Associates. They were the most aggressive intellectual property firm in Chicago. They were known for 2 things: their exorbitant retainers and their absolute ruthlessness. They were not the lawyers you hired to mediate a dispute. They were the lawyers you hired to bury the opposition. I found the number for their emergency legal counsel. I pulled my credit card from my wallet. It was a black metal card, heavy and cool to the touch. It was issued to Vesper LLC. I dialed the number. It rang once. Sterling and Associates, emergency line. How can we assist? The voice was crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of the emotional baggage I had just endured. My name is Mila Warren, I said. Professionally known as Vesper. I need to retain a senior partner immediately. What is the nature of the dispute? The voice asked. Intellectual property theft, I said, and extortion. One moment, Ms. Warren. I waited on hold. The hold music was classical, soothing and precise. It was the sound of order. It was the sound of consequences. 30 seconds later, a deeper voice came on the line. This is Robert Sterling. I am a senior partner. I am familiar with your work, Ms. Vesper. Your auction results are impressive. What can I do for you tonight? I did not tell him about the Thanksgiving snubs. I did not tell him about the childhood trauma, or the way my mother looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. I spoke in facts. I spoke in the language Madison claimed to understand. My father's company, Richard Realty, is currently using branding materials created by me 5 years ago, I said. Specifically, their logo, website headers, and marketing font packages. The lawyer hummed. Did you sign a transfer of copyright? No, I said. I did it as a favor. There was no contract, no payment. And now, I am revoking their license to use my intellectual property. Effective immediately. It sounded cold. It was. But I remembered the day I designed that logo. I was 22, working off a laptop that overheated if I used it for more than an hour. Richard had looked at the final design and said, "It is fine. It will save us hiring a real professional." He had built his brand on my free labor. Now, he was going to learn the cost of a professional. "Draft the cease and desist," I said. "They have 48 hours to scrub my work from their physical and digital assets. If they miss the deadline, we sue for retroactive licensing fees at current market rates." "Understood," the lawyer said. The sound of typing filled the line. "I will have the courier deliver the notice to their corporate headquarters first thing in the morning." "Is there anything else?" I looked across the studio. In the back, near the loading dock, was a storage closet I rarely opened. Inside was a dusty cardboard box labeled returns. "Yes," I said. I stood up, carrying the phone with me. I walked over to the closet and pulled the door open. The box sat on the floor, taped shut. Inside were the gifts I had tried to give them for years. Small paintings. Sketches. Hand-painted silk scarves. Every single one had been returned with a polite grimace or abandoned at restaurants. "We do not have room for this clutter, Mila," my mother had said last Christmas, handing back a small oil painting of the Chicago skyline. I pulled that painting out of the box now. I flipped it over. It was signed Vesper. "I have a collection of early works," I told the lawyer. "The provenance is clean. I am the sole owner." "Are you looking to insure them?" he asked. "No," I said. "I am consigning them. Tomorrow." I looked at the painting one last time. It was beautiful. It was full of light and hope, painted by a girl who still thought she could buy her family's love with talent. That girl was gone. But her work was still here. And it was valuable. "Title the catalog The Rejected Collection," I said. I was not just selling art. I was monetizing their rejection. I was taking the very symbols of their disdain and turning them into gold. "We will handle the paperwork," Sterling said. "Welcome to the firm, Ms. Warren." I hung up the phone. The studio was quiet again, but the air felt different. The heaviness was gone. The pressure in my chest had released. Austin was watching me from the desk. He had heard every word. A slow smile spread across his face. "The rejected collection," he said. "That is brutal." "It is business," I said. I walked back to my desk and closed the laptop. The war had begun. Madison wanted a cut. She wanted to talk about return on investment. I was about to give her a lesson in economics she would never forget. But as I sat there, feeling the adrenaline ebb into a cold resolve, I had no idea that the cease and desist was just the first domino. I had no idea what my lawyer was going to find when he started digging into Richard Realty. I thought I was fighting a battle over branding rights. I did not know I was about to uncover a crime. The morning sun hit the concrete floor of the studio with a brightness that felt aggressive. I sat at my desk, a mug of cold tea untouched beside my laptop. It had been 12 hours since I hired Robert Sterling, and the silence from my phone was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with anticipation. Austin was sitting at the worktable behind me, reviewing a stack of printed spreadsheets for his own firm. He had stayed the night. His presence a steady anchor in the chaotic sea my life had become. He looked tired. We both were. We had spent half the night cataloging the rejected collection, wrapping my old, despised paintings in bubble wrap and labeling them for consignment. My laptop pinged. It was not a text. It was an email from Sterling and Associates. The subject line was empty. There was only a red flag icon. I clicked it open. There was no polite greeting, no legal preamble. There was just a single line of text. "We need to talk. Immediately." Attached to the email was a document titled Project Phoenix Investor Pitch Deck Confidential. "Austin," I said. He looked up instantly, catching the tremor in my voice. He walked over and stood behind my chair, placing a hand on my shoulder. I clicked the link for the video call included in the email. Robert Sterling appeared on the screen. He was sitting in an office that looked like it cost more than my parents' entire company. Behind him, a wall of leather, bound books stood in judgment. He was not smiling. He looked like a man who had just looked under a rock and found a viper. "Good morning, Ms. Warren," he said. His voice was grave. "What is it?" I asked. "Did they ignore the cease and desist?" "We did not send it yet," Sterling said. My stomach tightened. "Why not?" "Because," Sterling said, leaning forward, "when we ran the preliminary asset search on Richard Realty to prepare the filing, we found something else. Something much more serious than copyright infringement." He gestured to the document on my screen. "Have you seen this document before?" he asked. I opened the attachment. The first slide was sleek, modern, and expensive. It featured the new logo, the one I had designed for free, and the title Project Phoenix. I scrolled down. It was a standard pitch deck for a Series B funding round. It was full of buzzwords about synergy and market disruption. It looked like the desperate flailing of a dying company trying to convince the world it was actually just resting. "I have never seen this," I said. "Go to slide 12, Sterling said. I scrolled. When the slide loaded, the breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. The slide was titled Proprietary Intellectual Property Assets. Taking up the entire left side of the screen was a high-resolution image of study number 4. The sketch Madison had mocked. The sketch that was currently sitting in a portfolio case by the door. But it was the text on the right that stopped my heart. Richard Realty owns the exclusive, perpetual commercial rights to the complete catalog of the artist known as Vesper. This asset class has appreciated 300% in the last fiscal year. Valuation, $15 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt dizzy, as if the floor had suddenly tilted. "They are claiming they own me," I whispered. "Keep scrolling," Sterling said. "The appendix." I went to the end of the document. There, scanned in high contrast, was a contract. It was titled Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement. It was dated 4 years ago. It granted Richard Realty full ownership of all past and future works created by Mila Warren, also known as Vesper. And at the bottom, above a solid black line, was a signature. Mila Warren. I stared at the ink. I knew that signature. I knew the loop of the M, the way the W slanted to the right. It was my handwriting. But I had never signed this document. I had never even seen this document. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. I was 16. It was my father's 50th birthday. I had written him a card, a long, heartfelt letter telling him how much I admired him. I had signed it with that exact flourish, trying to look grown up. "They traced it," I said. My voice was trembling. "They lifted my signature from an old birthday card or a tax document." "It is a forgery," Sterling said. "And it is a clumsy one. The pixelation on the signature block is visible if you zoom in. But to an untrained eye, or a hurried investor, it looks real. This is fraud," I said. "It is worse than fraud," Sterling replied. "It is wire fraud. It is identity theft. And because they sent this deck to potential investors across state lines, it is a federal crime. If this goes public, your parents and your sister are not just facing bankruptcy. They are facing prison." The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the hard drive. I looked at the screen, at the lies my family had told to save themselves. They had not just stolen my art. They had stolen my identity. They had turned me into a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. "Who did they send this to?" Austin asked. His voice was low, dangerous. Sterling looked down at his notes. "We found this copy on a secure server used for due diligence. It was uploaded 3 days ago. The intended recipient is a private equity firm called Helios Capital." The air left the room. Austin went rigid behind me. His hand on my shoulder tightened until it was painful. "Helios Capital," Austin repeated. "Yes," Sterling said. "Do you know them?" Austin let out a short, disbelief-filled breath. "Helios Capital is my client," he said. I know their managing partner. I am having lunch with him on Thursday. I looked up at Austin. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. They pitched this to your firm, I asked. He nodded slowly. They had no idea. They do not know who I really am. They just know I am the boyfriend, who drives a sedan and wears off the rack suits. They had no idea they were handing the evidence of their crime directly to the man who sleeps in your bed. They bet on my silence, I said, turning back to the screen. And they bet that nobody would check the provenance. Sterling cleared his throat. Ms. Warren, this changes the strategy. We are no longer looking at a civil suit for copyright infringement. We are holding a smoking gun. If I send this to the legal department at Helios, the deal dies instantly. Richard Realty will likely be investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I looked at the forged signature again. I thought about my father's laugh at the gala. I thought about Madison's demand for a cut. They wanted to be investors. Fine. Send it, I said. Are you sure? Sterling asked. Once I pull this trigger, there is no unpulling it. This will destroy them. I thought about the years of neglect. I thought about the way they made me feel small so they could feel big. I thought about the basement and the cold and the loneliness. They destroyed themselves, I said. I am just filing the paperwork. Send it to Helios, Austin added, his voice like ice. And send a copy to the police. Sterling nodded. Consider it done. The screen went black as the call ended. I sat there in the silence, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt a deep, hollowing grief for the family I never had. But mostly, I felt the cold, hard resolve of a businesswoman closing a toxic account. We have to go, Austin said. Moving away from the chair, he was already reaching for his coat. Go where? I asked. To my office, he said. If that deck is sitting on the Helios server, I need to flag it before the partners' meeting this afternoon. And then? He paused at the door, looking back at me. Then we wait for the fallout. I nodded. I stood up and walked over to the portfolio case by the door. I picked it up. I am coming with you. I said why. Because, I said, stepping into the light of the doorway. I want to be there when the check bounces. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires of our rental car. A sound that instantly transported me back to being 16 years old and terrified of missing curfew. But I was not 16 anymore. And I was not terrified. I looked up at the house. It was a sprawling Tudor estate in Lake Forest, manicured to within an inch of its life. The windows glowed with a warm, inviting amber light, suggesting a scene of domestic bliss inside. It was a lie, of course. Everything about the Richard Reedy brand was about curb appeal, about painting over the rot with a fresh coat of expensive beige. Ready? Austin asked, killing the engine. I checked my purse. Inside was a single manila envelope. It was not a gift. It was an indictment. Let us get this over with, I said. We walked to the front door. Before I could even ring the bell, it swung open. My mother stood there, wearing a cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my first car. Her face was arranged into a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, but it was the warmest expression she had directed at me in a decade. Mila, she exclaimed, reaching out to embrace me. We were so worried you would not come. And Austin, welcome, welcome. She smelled of Chardonnay and desperation. I let her hug me. It felt like hugging a mannequin, stiff, posed, and hollow. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, I said. We moved into the foyer. My father came out of the library, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He looked older than I remembered seeing him at the gala. His skin was gray, papery. The stress of hiding a $10 million secret was eating him alive. Mila, he said, nodding gravely. Good of you to join us. There was no mention of the gala. No mention of the deleted contract. No mention of the Instagram post. It was as if the last 2 weeks had been erased from the family hard drive. We were resetting to the factory settings. the dutiful daughter and the benevolent patriarch. Come, my mother said, ushering us toward the dining room. Dinner is ready. We did not want to wait. The dining room was set for a photo shoot. The long mahogany table was covered in a lace runner. Silver candlesticks flickered, casting long shadows against the silk wallpaper. A 20-pound turkey sat in the center, golden and glistening. Madison was already seated. She did not look up when we entered. She was aggressively stabbing a piece of lettuce in her salad bowl. "Hello, Madison," I said, taking the seat across from her. "Hey," she muttered, taking a sip of wine that was definitely too large to be polite. We sat down. The ritual began. My father carved the turkey. My mother passed the cranberry sauce. We talked about the weather. We talked about the traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. We talked about everything except the fact that they were criminals and I was the witness. Austin ate silently, his eyes darting between my family members like he was watching a nature documentary about predators losing their territory. Finally, as the plates were cleared and the pumpkin pie was brought out, the atmosphere shifted. My father cleared his throat. He put his napkin on the table and folded his hands. "Mila," he began, his voice taking on the sonorous tone he used for board meetings. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking since the gala." I put my fork down. "Here it comes," I thought. "We realize we have been hard on you," he said. "We did not understand your path. But seeing your success, seeing the value you have created, it has opened our eyes." He reached under his chair and pulled out a leather portfolio. It was identical to the one I had tried to give him. "We want to make things right," he said. "We want you to be a proper part of this family's legacy. Madison tells us you have built quite a catalog." He slid the portfolio across the polished wood. It stopped in front of me. I opened it. Inside was a single document. It was titled Retroactive Intellectual Property Addendum. I scanned the first page. It was a contract transferring ownership of all my past works to Richard Realty, effective 5 years ago. It was backdated. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "It is just a formality," my mother said quickly, her smile tightening. "Since we supported you during those years, our lawyers thinks it is best to have everything on paper. It protects you too, darling. It brings you under the corporate umbrella. It validates the forgery," I said. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father blinked. "Excuse me. You forged my signature on a pitch deck for Helios Capital," I said. "You told them you owned my work. You told them I was an asset. But you do not have a contract. So now, you need me to sign this backdated piece of garbage to keep you out of prison." Madison slammed her wine glass down. Red liquid sloshed onto the white lace. "See," she screamed, turning to my father. "I told you she would not sign it! I told you she is selfish!" "Madison, be quiet," my father hissed. "No." Madison stood up. Her face flushed and ugly with rage. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You sit there with your high and mighty attitude, judging us. But you are part of this family. Mila, that means you do what is necessary to survive." "I am not part of this family," I said calmly. "I am a creditor, and your debt is due." She grabbed the table edge, leaning over the centerpiece. "You have $15 million in assets sitting in a warehouse," she shrieked. "$15 million! And you are letting Mom and Dad lose the house. You are letting the company go under. You are a monster." I looked at her. I looked at the greed and the fear warring in her eyes. "I do not have $15 million, Madison," I said. "Yes, you do," she yelled. "We saw the valuation." "We saw the appraisal?" "You saw the valuation of the Vesper brand," I said. "The brand you tried to steal." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap right next to the turkey carcass. "What is that?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "That," I said, "is a copy of the email my lawyer sent to Helios Capital this morning." My father's face went white. It was not a gradual pallor. It was instant, as if the blood had simply evaporated from his body. You sent it? He whispered. I did, I said. I flagged the pitch deck as fraudulent. I confirmed that the signature on the asset transfer was a forgery, and I attached a police report for identity theft. Madison stopped screaming. She slowly sank back into her chair. She looked from me to the envelope, and for the first time in her life, she looked small. But, my mother stammered. But that will ruin the deal. The deal was dead the moment you decided to commit a felony, Austin said. He spoke for the first time, his voice calm and devastating. My father picked up the envelope. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the clasp. He pulled out the papers. He stared at them, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Why? He croaked. Why would you do this? We are your parents. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had laughed at my art. The man who had treated me like a bad investment until he realized he could sell me for parts. Because you did not ask, I said. He looked up confused. What? If you had asked me for help, I said. If you had come to me 6 months ago and said the company was in trouble. If you had treated me like a daughter instead of a defect. I would have helped you. I would have given you the license. I would have saved you. I stood up. I smoothed the napkin on the table. But you did not ask, I continued, you took. You stole. You assumed that 'cause you made me, you owned me. I turned to Madison. And as for the 15 million, I said. That is the projected value of my future work. Work that you will never touch. Work that you will never profit from. I signaled to Austin. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. We are leaving, I said. Wait, my mother cried, standing up and knocking her chair over. Mila, please. You can withdraw the complaint. You can call them and say it was a misunderstanding. Please! They will arrest your father! I looked at her. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her heavy makeup. It was a moving performance, but that is all it was. A performance. I cannot withdraw the truth, Mom, I said. I walked toward the foyer. The sound of my mother's sobbing filled the house, a high, keen wail that bounced off the expensive artwork and the marble floors. As I reached the door, my father's voice stopped me. It was not angry anymore. It was defeated. You are ungrateful, he said. We gave you everything. I turned back one last time. I looked at the beautiful house that was built on debt and deceit. You gave me nothing, I said. I painted my own way out of the dark. And now, I am taking the light with me. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold November night. The air was sharp and clean, free of the scent of roasting turkey and rotting lies. Austin followed me, closing the heavy oak door with a solid, final thud. We walked to the car in silence. The gravel crunched under our feet again, but this time, it did not sound like fear. It sounded like freedom. Did you see his face? Austin asked as we got into the car. I did, I said. He is going to call his lawyer, Austin said. He is going to try to fight this. Let him, I said, buckling my seatbelt. He does not have a lawyer anymore. Sterling represented the company for 20 years, and Sterling just dropped him to represent me. Austin started the car. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the long driveway leading away from the estate. Where to? He asked. Take me to the studio, I said. I have work to do. On Thanksgiving? Especially on Thanksgiving, I said. I looked out the window as the house disappeared in the rearview mirror. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, a space where a heavy burden had been carried for too long. The cord was cut. The wound was cauterized. I was an orphan now, by choice and by necessity. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, terrifyingly whole. We did not turn on the main lights when we entered the studio. We did not need to. The street lamps from the industrial district filtered through the high clerestory windows, casting long, geometric beams of pale, orange light across the concrete floor. It felt less like a workspace and more like a cathedral of silence. I walked over to the heating unit and cranked it up. The pipes groaned in protest, a metallic shimmer of sound that echoed in the rafters. Austin did not sit down. He paced the perimeter of the room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He was speaking to the managing partner at Helios Capital. He was doing the professional courtesy of explaining why his girlfriend had just detonated a grenade in the middle of a $10 million due diligence process. I sat on the floor in front of the large canvas I had been working on before the gala. It was part of the Ecliptic series, a study in voids and event horizons. I looked at the black paint, seeing the layers of depth I had built up over months. It looked different to me now. Before, it had looked like a hiding place. Now, it looked like a destination. Austin ended the call. He walked over to me, his footsteps echoing. He sat down on the floor beside me, leaning his back against the leg of the work table. "It is done," he said quietly. "Tell me," I said. "Helios received the email," he said. "They opened the file 5 minutes after we left your parents' house. They cross-referenced the signature on the transfer agreement with the verified signature on your cease and desist. Took them less than 3 minutes to confirm the forgery." "And the deal?" I asked. Austin said. "Buried. They are issuing a formal withdrawal of the term sheet within the hour. And, Mila, they are not just walking away. They are furious. They feel exposure. They are sending a forensic audit team to Richard Realty's offices at 9 in the morning to secure their own liability." I nodded slowly. I tried to feel guilt. I tried to summon that old, familiar ache that told me I was a bad daughter for causing my parents pain. But the achy was gone. In its place was a clinical detachment, the kind a doctor feels when they finally diagnose a terminal illness. The diagnosis was greed. The prognosis was fatal. "They will be facing an insolvency hearing by Christmas," Austin added. I pulled my knees to my chest. "It is better this way," I said. If the deal had gone through, if Finn and the fraud was discovered later, they would be facing 20 years in federal prison. Now, they are just facing bankruptcy. I saved them, Austin. I just did not save their pride. The silence returned, settling over us like a heavy blanket. We sat there for an hour, watching the orange light shift across the floor as the moon rose higher outside. I thought about the basement in Lake Forest. I thought about the smell of mildew and the sound of Madison walking around in heels on the floorboards above my head. I thought about the girl who used to paint in the dark, hoping that if she made something beautiful enough, they would finally turn on the light. Then, the banging started. It was a violent, frantic hammering on the heavy steel door of the studio. It was not the knock of a visitor. It was the assault of someone who believed they were owed entry. "Open up." It was my father's voice, muffled by the steel but unmistakable in its panic. "Mila, open this door." Austin started to stand up, his body tensing for a fight. I put a hand on his arm. "No," I said. "Stay here." I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. I walked across the warehouse floor, my boots making a rhythmic thud. Thud that sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. I unlocked the deadbolt. I threw the heavy latch. I pulled the door open. My parents stood on the loading dock, illuminated by the harsh glare of the security light. They looked like refugees from a destroyed life. My father was still wearing his dinner jacket, but his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose. My mother was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, her face streaked with mascara. Madison was behind them, pacing near their parked Mercedes, talking rapidly into her phone, her voice shrill and tight. "Mila," my mother gasped, stepping forward. "You have to stop this. You have to fix it." I stood in the doorway, blocking their path. I did not invite them in. The studio was a sacred space. It was the one place they had not contaminated, and I intended to keep it that way. "There is nothing to fix," I said. "The truth is out." My father pushed past my mother. His face was a mask of red fury and white fear. "You do not understand what you have done?" he shouted, spitting the words at me. "Helios just called. They are sending auditors. They are talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission. Do you know what that means? It means ruin, Mila. It means we lose everything. The house, the cars, the club memberships." I looked at him. I really looked at him. For the first time, I did not see a titan of industry. I did not see the powerful man who commanded rooms. I saw a small, frightened man who had spent his life buying respect he had never earned. "You lost everything years ago, Dad," I said. "You have just been running on fumes and fraud. How can you be so cold?" My mother wailed. "We are your family?" I looked at her. "Family," I said. "That is an interesting word. Was I family when you made me pay rent to live in a moldy basement? Was I family when you laughed at my art in front of your board members? Was I family when you stole my identity to pay your debts? We did it for the family," she screamed. "To keep the legacy alive. For you, for Madison." "For Madison," I corrected. "It was always for Madison. And it was always for the image. You did not care about the business. You cared about how the business made you look. You cared about the country club, and the galas and the headlines. You were willing to sell me out just to keep the lights on in the ballroom." Madison stopped pacing and stormed up the steps of the loading dock. She shoved her phone into her pocket. "You think you are so smart," she sneered. "You think you have won. But you are going to go down with us. When the bankruptcy court seizes the assets, they will come for your little studio too. They will come for your paintings. You are part of Richard Realty whether you like it or not." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, sharp and bright. "Actually," I said, reaching into the back pocket of my jeans. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt. "I consulted with Sterling this morning," I said, "since I never signed a contract. And since the transfer agreement was a forgery, my assets are completely ring-fenced. In fact, as the victim of identity theft, I am a creditor. Which means when the bankruptcy court liquidates your estate, I will be first in line to get paid." Madison's mouth fell open. She looked like she had been slapped. You planned this," she whispered. "I did not plan anything," I said. "I just wanted to give my father a drawing for his anniversary. You are the ones who turned it into a war." My father slumped against the doorframe. The fight went out of him all at once. He slid down until he was sitting on the cold metal of the dock. His head in his hands. He began to weep. It was a jagged, ugly sound. "Please," he sobbed, "Mila, please? Just call them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you signed the papers and you just forgot. We can backdate it. We can fix the signature. Just give us time." I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had looked at my portfolio case 3 hours ago. Like it was garbage. Like I was garbage. "I cannot sign, Dad," I said softly. He looked up, hope flickering in his wet eyes. Why not?" "Because," I said, "I already gave the original forgery to the police." The color drained from his face for the second time that night. He realized, finally, that there was no negotiation. There was no deal to be made. The leverage was gone. My mother let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She lunged at me, her hands reaching for my shirt, her nails aiming for my face. "You ungrateful witch!" she screamed. I wish I had never. Austin was there before she could touch me. He stepped out of the shadows, placing his large frame between me and my mother. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a wall of immovable calm. "I think it is time for you to leave," he said. My mother stopped. She looked at Austin, then at my father huddled on the ground, then at Madison who was staring at the receipt in my hand with horror. They were broken. They were a pile of shattered glass, trying to pretend they were still a mirror. "Help your father up," I told Madison. She did not argue. She walked over and grabbed my father's arm, hoisting him to his feet. He looked frail. He looked old. He leaned heavily on her, stumbling toward the stairs. My mother looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes. There was only hate. Pure, distilled hate. "You are dead to us," she hissed. I looked her in the eye. "I died 5 years ago, Mom," I said. "You just did not notice until the funeral was expensive." I stepped back and grabbed the heavy steel handle of the door. "Goodbye," I said. I swung the door shut. The latch clicked into place with a sound that felt like the final period at the end of a long, terrible sentence. I locked the deadbolt. I turned around. The studio was quiet. The orange light was still beautiful. Austin was watching me, his expression soft. "Are you okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. It smelled like work. It smelled like freedom. I walked over to the work table and picked up a palette knife. I scraped a blob of dried paint off the surface. "I am not okay," I said, looking at the blank canvas waiting for me. "I am perfect." It took 3 days for Richard Realty to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It took 6 months for the forensic auditors to finish tearing apart the carcass of my father's company. They found everything. The forged contracts, the inflated assets, the loans taken out against properties that did not exist. The headlines were brutal. They called it the Lake Forest Ponzi scheme. My father was currently out on bail, awaiting trial for wire fraud. My mother had moved into a small condo in the suburbs, stripped of her country club membership and her social standing. Madison was working as a junior assistant at a marketing firm in Ohio, trying to outrun a reputation that had followed her across state lines. I did not visit them. I did not send money. I let the consequences fall exactly where gravity dictated they should. I stood in the center of a gallery in Chelsea, New York. The floors were polished concrete, and the walls were a stark, blinding white. The air smelled of expensive cologne and anticipation. It was a long way from the warehouse district in Chicago. On the main wall, spotlighted by a halo of halogen, hung study number 4. The charcoal sketch looked small against the vast white wall. It was just a piece of paper, smudged by my fingers, born from a moment of desperate love. But tonight, it was the centerpiece of the evening. Austin stood beside me. He slipped his hand into mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Are you nervous?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. I am relieved." The gallery director stepped up to the podium. The room hushed. The auction was not for profit, it was a statement. Lot 42. The director announced. "Study number 4, by the artist Vesper. Opening bid is $45,000. A paddle went up in the front row. Then another in the back. Then a phone bidder. The price climbed. 50,000. 55. 60. I watched the numbers rise, but I was not calculating the money. I was calculating the irony. My father had looked at this drawing and seen trash. The market looked at it and saw treasure. It was the ultimate validation, not of my skill, but of my worth. "Sold," the director said, slamming the gavel down. To the bidder on the phone for $65,000. The room erupted in polite applause. I squeezed Austin's hand. I walked up to the microphone. The applause died down. I looked out at the sea of faces. Collectors, critics, investors. People who valued art not for what it could do for them, but for what it was. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. 6 months ago, I was told that this drawing belonged in a bathroom. I was told that my passion was a hobby, and my difference was a defect. I paused. I saw a young girl in the back of the room, clutching a sketchbook. She looked terrified and hopeful, just like I used to be. "They were wrong," I said, looking directly at her. "Your difference is not a defect. It is your currency. Your rejection is not a failure. It is fuel." I gestured to the red dot next to the sketch. "The proceeds from tonight's sale will not go to me," I announced. "They will fund the Vesper Scholarship for underprivileged artists in Chicago. We are going to pay for supplies. We are going to pay for studio space. And we are going to teach young artists that their work has value, even if their families cannot see it. The applause this time was not polite. It was raucous. It felt like a wave washing over me, cleansing the last lingering bits of doubt. Later that night, back in the quiet of my new studio, I stood before a blank canvas. The city lights of New York twinkled outside the window, a million miles away from the sterile lilies of the gala. Austin walked in, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "To the rejected collection," he said, raising a glass. "To the liquidation," I replied, clinking my glass against his. I set the champagne down and picked up a brush. I dipped it into a pot of gold paint. It was real gold leaf, suspended in oil. It was expensive. It was permanent. I did not paint a landscape. I did not paint a void. I painted a single, straight line across the center of the canvas. A horizon. A beginning. Then, I moved to the bottom right corner. For 5 years, I had signed my work vesper. I had hidden behind the evening prayer, afraid of the daylight. But the sun had risen. The shadows were gone. I painted an M. Then an I. Then an L, then an A, Mila. I stepped back. The gold caught the light, shimmering with an undeniable brilliance. I was no longer just the daughter who failed. I was no longer just the artist who hid. I was both. And I was neither. I was the asset they were too blind to value, and I had finally cashed out. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from the bankruptcy trustee. The sale of my parents' estate had been finalized. The debt was settled. The ledger was closed. I looked at the signature on the canvas. They wanted a return on investment. I whispered to the empty room. I smiled, picking up the brush again. I gave them one.